Since United States President Donald Trump began his new term in office, some of the fears of the migrant community have been coming true. White House figures show that Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrested over 100,000 people suspected of violating immigration law from January 20 to the first week of June. That's around 750 arrests per day, double the average over the past decade. Trump's immigration policy has caused a wave of anxiety among Filipinos, one of the biggest immigrant groups in the U.S. Some Filipino immigrants, even green card holders who have not had any trouble with ICE for the longest time, have been arrested, detained, or deported. But the community remains vigilant. Among the groups that has stepped up is the Tanggol Migrante network, which has been defending Filipino migrants despite the challenges and criticism. Hello, I'm Michelle Abad, and welcome to At Home sa Abroad, Rappler's one-stop show for everything related to the Filipino diaspora. Here we discuss topics important to Filipinos all over the world, from concerns and welfare of overseas Filipino workers to celebrating Pinoy success stories and reconnecting with cultural roots at iba pa. For this episode, we sit down with Andan Bonifacio, National Chair of Bayan USA, one of the convening organizations of Tanggol Migrante. Andan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just get right into it. And I know this is a loaded question, but how has the Filipino community been these days during the Trump 2.0 administration? And it's been over half a year since the administration began.
Yes, what a loaded question indeed, no? I'd say that the situation is not normal, no? There are many different things about this Trump administration that are different this time around because he had the opportunity of his first term to learn how the system worked. No, most recently we've been slapped with Trump's big beautiful bill, his budget bill, no, which spells disaster for many working class communities, Filipinos included. Among some of the things that we're monitoring are slashes to the healthcare budget, to the budget for food assistance, no. There's even a 1% tax on remittances, no, for non-citizens, which we know would have a huge impact on our OFWs, immigrants who are still supporting our loved ones back home, no, sa Philippines. And then, of course, in big news is the tariffs, no. This is going to increase prices for everyone here, and particularly for the tariffs levied on the Philippines. It's going to affect how much we pay for the goods that we love to eat when we miss home, no? And the biggest thing, of course, at the top of everyone's minds is the situation of immigration here, right? Communities are living in a lot of fear, especially with the type of shock and awe tactics that are happening, such as mass raids in Los Angeles and other types of tactics like that. And so for those Filipinos whose loved ones have been detained or are fearful of being detained, life is just so difficult here. So that's kind of a picture of how it is for Filipinos dito po sa US.
Mm-hmm. Since nabanggit mo na din yung sa the recent policies that came, the tariffs, the big beautiful bill, I think so far yung mga naririnig namin dito sa Pilipinas ay medyo up in the air na may warnings and how this will affect the migrants. But as of now ba may mga nararamdaman na like on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just the numbers alone, there's at least 26% of Filipino households who are receiving some form of public insurance. Included there is medical insurance, no? And so a lot of people are fearful that these cuts will impact their access to medicine, impact their access to healthcare, which already is very difficult to receive here in the United States. And so those fears are definitely here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So going back to Tanggol Migrante, no? So, I personally, I'm not sure when exactly it started, but I've started seeing it during the Trump administration. So how did the network come together?
Yeah, Bayan USA are different allied organizations like Migrante, which is composed of migrant workers all across the country. We've been following the presidential election campaign in 2024 between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And we were really studying what were they putting in their campaign platforms. And of course, one of the biggest campaign promises Trump had nung nasa campaign trail siya is the promise of mass deportations. No? And so we've been preparing our community for that ever since, before November, before he was even elected. But once he was elected, we kicked it into gear. And unfortunately, we were shocked that almost immediately, the Philippine ambassador to the United States, Jose Romualdez, downplayed the issue, gave some inaccurate figures, some inaccurate information, and then sowed a lot of fear in the community when he advised people to just voluntarily or self-depart without even having any consultation with lawyers. So, we kicked it into gear. We requested to know, what is the plan of the Philippine embassy and its consulates to protect those who are most vulnerable in our community. And we were given the runaround, answering machines, hanging up the phone on us, non-answers, but we didn't let that stop us. So throughout December 2024 into January 2024, even before the inauguration of Trump happened, we were building out this network. We were engaging different unions, churches, student groups, teachers, media professionals, nonprofits, and many more about this concern. And we we launched the Defend Migrants campaign, which eventually brought together these different groups into the Tanggol Migrante network. And so sure enough, when Trump assumed office, the crackdown started almost on day one, and we went straight to work. So in these past 6 months, we've been fighting alongside families, monitoring the situation, and holding those institutions that have the responsibility to protect our kababayan accountable.
Mm-hmm. Were there any fears with some of the groups or even the individuals who were interested in joining? Because I would imagine that since there was such fear that came from even just the campaign, even before Trump assumed office, people were saying that even the documented or the green card holders wouldn't be safe. And so I also assume that perhaps much of your composition in the network are people who are documented or green card holders. So did you encounter those types of people who would be interested to join, but they were afraid to be organized?
Yeah, of course. No, and it's totally understandable. No, again, this is not normal, despite how U.S. officials, even sometimes Philippine state officials, are just saying that this is, business as usual for the immigration scene here in the United States. So there's that fear that's there, but in the process of showing what community action can look like, and also recalling our own history, there have been many instances where migrant communities in the United States have come together to defeat very anti-migrant policies and to defend our kababayan from deportation. So it's not only now that Bayan USA or other organizations who are part of the Tanggol Migrante movement have been taking up anti-deportation cases. So when we're able to share those things, and when the families of those affected most are willing to fight, they help inspire each other and they help to allay that fear.
Okay. Let's go now to some of the notable cases that Tanggol Migrante has been handling. I've seen a few particular names that are in the campaigns of Tanggol Migrante. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about Tanggol Migrante is that it's the families themselves whose loved ones are in detention who have been at the heart of our alliance. And so, of course, while Bayan USA organizations, other organizations who are part of the alliance have been fighting tooth and nail, it's also been alongside those families and even the people who are in detention themselves. We hear stories of through walls of basically solitary confinement. People hear other migrants speaking Tagalog, and they'll call out to them and say, did you know that there's people out there who are willing to fight for us too and fight with us? So that's who's at the heart of Tanggol Migrante. And some of those people that we've been fighting alongside are people like Auntie Lynn or Lulin Dixon, Kuya Max Londonio, who are just two among several Filipinos who, because of the campaign work and the steadfastness and perseverance of the organizations and the families, have been released and reunited with their families. But there are many more people, and actually just this past week alone, we are contacted almost every day by new families whose loved ones were either at threat of being detained or who had been detained already. People like Tita Rebecca, Tito Ernie, these are just some of the names, Kuya Sani, Ate Alma Bowman, and unfortunately the list goes on and on and on. And the unfortunate and devastating thing about Trump's crackdown and some of the inadequate responses from our own Philippine government is that some of our kababayan have already been deported. Those like Ate Ligaya Jensen, there was a Lola, 6 years old, had built her life here, who was just decided to go back home to the Philippines rather than face the threat of detention. Her name's Lola Bibi. And so these are our titas, our siblings, our mothers, our lolas, right? The sole breadwinners of our families who are facing these inhumane detention centers. And, some of them have court hearings coming up, and we continue to fight alongside all these people and the many more who unfortunately will continue to be targeted by Trump.
For our viewers' reference, I'm sure that some of our viewers who are tuning in today have not heard of these cases. So would it be okay for you to elaborate on maybe just one of the cases that you mentioned, and why it's notable and alarming that this particular case has been taken up by the Trump administration? Anyone that you'd like to expound on?
Yeah, I mean, some of the most, high profile or most publicly visible cases have been those of the ones who have been freed, because it's made the news as well. I'd really encourage people to look at our Facebook for the recorded press conferences so you can hear from the families themselves. But one person, Kuya Max, he was coming back from the Philippines, a family trip, and he was stopped in the airport. He was held there, without regular access to food. And it was so hard for the family to get in contact with him. And so we were pushing the Philippine Consulate to intervene, because they are the only institution that can reach those held by Customs and Border Protection inside airports before he would have been transferred to the detention center. And unfortunately, they took too long to take action. He was transferred to the detention center, where he stayed for months, faced really inhumane conditions, was forced to eat food. He would share stories of the beans that he was eating had maggots crawling in them. He was forced to be separated from the community that he'd built there. And it was because of that community effort that we were able to find him legal support, campaign for his release, work alongside his family, who was there from day one. And he's been such a huge part of helping to build the Tanggol Migrante movement since his release too.
Yeah, I've covered this myself, and just for our viewers' reference, Kuya Max is a green card holder, right?
Yes, that's right.
Has he ever run into trouble with ICE before?
It was just a few, not with ICE. I mean, he'd be questioned maybe when entering the airport, but this is a whole different story, being detained for almost 5 days within the airport and facing these kinds of inhumane conditions, not even in the detention center, mind you. And then, of course, he experienced the cruelty of the Northwest Detention Center in Washington State.
Right, yeah. I do remember that. I remember there was a criminal record from before, which I know that he resolved from back then. And I remember from reading from the references that he was never held for more than a few minutes at the airport, and he was always allowed back in. So this was an alarming case to look at. Moving forward now, the Philippine government officials have always told the public that they're on top of the situation. They're providing various forms of assistance for migrants who need it. How would you assess its performance, and how is your coordination with Philippine authorities? Because like you mentioned, they're the ones who actually have the capacity and authority to speak to U.S. enforcement.
Yeah, I simply just say that actions speak louder than words, and maybe I can give you some examples of what I mean. I had been explaining earlier that back as early as November, when we heard that Trump was elected, we were requesting to meet and sit down with the embassy, sit down with the consulates to hear what their plan was and to share the concerns of the community that would be most impacted. but we weren't given a response. No? And since we weren't given a response, we believe in the power of collective action. We held a mobilization at the embassy on International Human Rights Day to raise the issues of migrants and immigrants, among others. And when we noticed that when we were approaching the embassy, we noticed something very strange. There were people who were running back inside the embassy. They were turning off the lights, and we didn't pay so much attention. We thought they were just trying to close up shop before the action got there. But the following day, we learned in a press advisory that actually while we were there in front of the embassy, they were holding a meeting among all consul generals and the ambassador to talk about immigration. So they weren't responding to our requests for a meeting. They weren't responding to our concerns. And when we did show up, they closed the lights and closed the doors on us. No, we were talking about Kuya Max. No, another example is that, and again, I encourage people to really hear from him and his family directly. We held a press conference where he detailed, very bravely the experiences that he faced at the detention center, the cruelty he faced there, the neglect he faced from consular officials. And after that, it was really upsetting, but the Philippine consulate had the gall to release a statement refuting the family's claims. And of course, we had to refute those things. Again, the consulate had a 5-day window to intervene when he was being held at the airport to do something before he was transferred to a detention center. They acted too slow. No, they only offered to reach out for legal aid maybe 3 days before his court hearing, and it was too late. No. One thing that they will always promote in press statements is that they are visiting Filipinos in detention centers. No, but what it actually looks like, and what it looked like at the Northwest Detention Center, where Kuya Max and many other Filipinos are being held, is that the detainees, including Kuya Max, were held for over 5 hours, just waiting for the consulate representatives to meet with them. So they were missing meals. They're actually being made to wait without any explanation of who was meeting them. And one of the detainees even started feeling anxious, na baka ma-deport na siya. And so that meeting, it ended up being 15 minutes with 5 detainees together. There's not much you can do in that time, and not much assistance you can give, or even reassurance that the Philippine consulate or the Philippine government has your back or is ready to fight for them. And for that reason, when consular officials showed up to the court hearing, the family didn't want them in the courtroom. They had lost trust in those officials. And so, there's so many other examples I could cite, about the crumbs in assistance to nationals that are being given despite, over ₱1 billion pesos, being allocated for assistance to nationals. Just a few thousand are being given to those covered by, let's say, the Philippine consulate in San Francisco. They cited 3,500. And meanwhile, just about a month before, I believe, the Philippine embassy spent $15,000 on an event to celebrate Philippine Independence Day. So, the bottom line, I think, is the Philippine government would like to say it's taking action on certain cases. We're not saying they're doing nothing. What we're saying is that the approach is wrong. They're not doing enough with enough urgency. They're not seeing that these are not isolated cases, but something that need a comprehensive response and not just one-off visits or one-off disbursements of aid.
Have you ever gotten that meeting that you asked for, like Tanggol Migrante with the embassy? Have you gotten that at this point?
Not with the embassy, actually. Several of our organizations who are part of the alliance have met with consular officials. I myself was made to wait mga 3 hours sa isang lobby ng Philippine consulate, just waiting for them to get back to us if they'd meet with us or not. And we stayed there till closing hours and no one was there. So we decided to leave. But with the embassy, they actually publicly refused to meet with us. They cited that we had a lack of sincerity in meeting, which, again, actions speak louder than words. And I think for those in detention and the general public, we can maybe judge for ourselves who we think lacks sincerity in these cases.
So there's the challenges with the Philippine consulates and the embassy. Now let's go to the challenges with assisting migrants. Like you mentioned how there are families who go up to you. They're the ones who approach you and ask for help. What challenges do you face in assisting them? Like, are there limits to what you can offer?
Of course, one is that the environment here makes it very difficult for people to organize around migrant rights. No, I mentioned before that it's not a normal situation. No, even organizations who are trying to protect migrant rights are being labeled as terrorist organizations by the Trump administration. There are many different institutions, nonprofits, grassroots organizations that have received letters from the Senate claiming that they're supporting, violent acts or supporting terrorism. So there are those considerations, and of course, the fact that a lot of the laws and policies being set up are anti-migrant, anti-people. No, we're also seeing that with the increase in ICE raids, the increase in the types of schemes that ICE is using, there's harder situations to navigate. No, there was recent cases of cruise ship workers, which Customs and Border Protection boarded. They slapped on charges that they never provided evidence for these Filipino cruise ship workers. No, and those cruise ship workers were deported, and their valid visas were revoked or canceled. No, of course, legal assistance. There is no shortage of need for legal representation. No, and that's actually one of the biggest things that the families have told us about, and one of the biggest things that we've asked the consulates and the embassy to help provide. No, the embassy signed a memorandum of understanding with a legal organization, but up until now, we haven't really been seeing the kind of pro bono legal services that we'd expect for migrants in distress. And again, we have to question, where budgets are going to. It's notoriously hard, to understand where sometimes department budgets go to for Philippine agencies. And in 2023, for example, we were really trying to dig where the Action Fund of the Department of Migrant Workers were going to, because of course, even before Trump, we've been helping migrant workers with their issues here. And one thing we found out that in that year, 2023, by August, only around 20% of their budget for the Action Fund had been spent, less than 20%. Mm-hmm. So, the extreme financial hardship, the legal hardship, medical neglect, right? These are all things that we're trying to source from our community members, health organizations, nurses who just really care about our kababayan, migrants in need, churches, our allies who are part of legal alliances. We've been trying to work together with them, but and have led to good results. But again, we're not the ones with the funding, or the mandate that's supposed to, or dedicated funding to be helping our kababayan in need. And so while we continue to mobilize our community to support, we also are trying to continue holding the U.S. government and Philippine government accountable to protect Philippine nationals.
Mm. So I'm sure you receive criticism for the work you do. Like even in our case, like when we report on certain cases, like I remember the report that we filed on Max Londoño, there are comments that were saying that the ones that are targeted or they have criminal or immigration cases in the first place. So why bother defending them? Like we get a bunch of comments that say just follow the law. So how do you respond to such remarks?
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation, I'd say, going around. What's happening now isn't happenstance. No, there are systems at play, like these detention centers that profit, per bed, per night, from people being detained in these cramped conditions, who are almost running the show. and who are benefiting from such a cruel system and who benefit from narratives that try to divide our community. Unfortunately, this also includes officials like Jose Romualdez. I mentioned some of the things he'd said already, and what was very disappointing was that when President Ferdinand Marcos, he had a state visit here to Washington D.C. He kind of just parroted a lot of the lines that those are just criminals or illegals who are in detention. And meanwhile, he's, instead of meeting with those who are really in distress, he's negotiating what some are calling very bad trade deals, securing more military aid for the Philippines. And so I digress, but it's those officials who are benefiting from narratives that divide our community. But going back to your original question, in the first place, no one should have to face the inhumane conditions that migrants like Auntie Lynn, Kuya Max, Kuya Dante faced in these detention centers. They were unjustly taken from their families. Some were held inside airports for days, sleeping on the floors, no access to regular food, only to be taken to overcrowded detention centers, put in solitary confinement, basically, without access to edible food, without access to medication that literally their life depends on it, blood pressure medication, kidney medication, and so on. So no one should have to face those inhumane condition centers. Second, it's not true what some of the rhetoric is saying, or some of the media is saying, that it's only criminals who are being targeted. And you mentioned that before. It's like assuming someone is guilty rather than assuming they're innocent until they're proven guilty. So again, the recent examples of cruise ship workers, or even hearing of Filipinas who are being accused of domestic violence, which are so far unfounded, who might actually be in abusive relationships themselves with their husbands. And so there are a lot of different ways where the current system is set up to disadvantage those most vulnerable in our communities. So we can't believe all the rhetoric that are just saying that it's just criminals, just quote unquote illegals or undocumented people who are being attacked. And then at the end of the day, if you talk with the people that we have worked with, kahit nagkamali sila sometimes in their life, or one time in their life, it doesn't mean that they don't deserve dignity. It doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be with their loved ones. And it doesn't mean that they should be treated as less than human. So that's what I'd say to those who are, maybe believing some of those things, to take a deeper look, and maybe for many folks, they might not think it could happen to their loved ones, but this is really an issue facing our entire community. So let's also take care of each other and understand where each other are coming from. There's a lot of stories behind the people that we're fighting alongside. It's important for us to understand that and not judge, so that we can be there to defend the most vulnerable in our communities.
Last question for now, and then I noticed that during the press conferences, there are always calls to action to those who are in the Zoom call, for example, that are also community organizations, to spread the word. And I see that there's really an effort to try and grow the alliance. So what do you think is the significance of growing the alliance during these times?
Yeah, we started as a Defend Migrant campaign. We brought together several organizations. We formed this Tanggol Migrante network. And then one of the latest developments is actually on the day of SONA, President Marcos' SONA, we relaunched as a Tanggol Migrante movement. And we relaunched as a movement because the stakes are so high. We already have people who are just leaving their families here because they don't want to be detained. We have people who are unjustly detained and being deported. And we have to say, not one more. The situation is urgent, and not one more person should have to suffer these conditions. So that's why we're forming the alliance. It's in our history, that our people, our community come together at the darkest hours. We band together to fight, no matter how powerful our our opponents or our foes may seem. And again, going back to the families, no, these are folks who I can't even begin to imagine what it's like now. No, I come myself from a family. My own mother, no, was detained by back then it wasn't ICE, it was Immigration Naturalization Services, and you know how I wish back then that there was an alliance like the Tanggol Migrante movement to be there for my family at its darkest times. No, and that's the importance of it now. No, that the families and so many other organizations, Filipinos from across the U.S. are coming together to defend those most vulnerable. And so, for all those who are listening, we need you. No, whether you are a church, whether you're a nurse, whether you are a lawyer, whether you're just in high school and you're wanting to help out because you're scared about your parents or your tita. No, any walk of life, any age, anywhere in the U.S., we need you to help us form this alliance to help form the Tanggol Migrante movement.
All right. Thank you so much, Andan, for your time.
Thank you so much.
And to our viewers, if you would like to share your thoughts on how Filipino migrants are affected by Trump's immigration policy, download the Rappler Communities app and let's continue the conversation in the Security and Global Affairs channel. Again, you're tuned into At Home sa Abroad on Rappler. I'm Michelle Abad. Thank you for listening.